Good afternoon, everybody. This is Doug Martin with the Natural Resource Damage Program. We will start this meeting. It does seem like some people are still trickling in, but for the most part, we have over 30 people on already, so we'll get this going. Miranda, can you go back to the introductory slide, please? So, as a meeting overview for this Upper Clark Fork River Advisory Council meeting, Bill Rosbeck and will be running this meeting along with assistance from Miranda and myself. We do ask that all AC members and the public raise your hand in the Teams Outlook. If you go to the top or somewhere on your board, there should be a raise your hand if you do have a question or do want to make a comment. We will be holding questions and comments until each presenter is done, and they will announce that they're open for questions now, just to help with the format of this. If for some reason you're calling in on a phone and you don't have the raise your hand icon, if you would just please introduce yourself and indicate that you do have a question, we'll take your question or comment at that point in time. We also ask that since this is a virtual meeting, that all participants who are asking a question or making a comment announce their name before they speak, so that we can get that on the recording. As for when we do, there is an action item here, and the council members will be voting, and we will actually call each of you out, and you can unmute yourself to make your vote. And I just got a text from Maureen saying she's still trying to get on. So, so with that, I guess we can wait for Maureen. And one of the other things that we'd ask people to do is, if you're not speaking, to keep yourself muted. We don't have the ability in Teams to control everybody muting and unmuting, so you have to mute and unmute yourself. So, but if you would keep yourself muted prior to speaking, we'd appreciate it.
Doug, this is Miranda. Just to interject, I do have the ability to mute people. But I'll only do that if I'm hearing a lot of feedback. I just don't have the ability to unmute people.
Okay.
And I also wanted to note that I want to remind people that the meeting is recorded. I think you mentioned it, but.
Okay, next slide, please, Miranda. So this is a Upper Advisory Council meeting that will consider Clark Fork Watershed Education Program funding, and the NRD program staff will be providing its annual update to the Advisory Council. So I'm just one second here. I have to forward a link to Miranda, or to. Okay. So next slide. So the quick agenda. This is an abbreviated agenda. The full agenda is in the meeting packet that was sent to the Advisory Council, as well as placed on the website for the public if you are interested in looking at that. Following that, there's an action item, as I mentioned before, the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program funding amendment that Shannon Gilski will provide. Joel Chavez and Bo Downing will provide an update to the Clark Fork River remediation and restoration process that's going on. And then Shannon Gilski will give a financial report for the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund. and then Alicia Stickney, Brian Barkowiak, and Greg Moan will give an update of the restoration activities that have been taking place in the upper Clark Fork, as well as at the end we'll play a video that the Clark Fork Coalition and NRD partnered on to provide kind of a nice update of some of the activities that took place in the Boulder Creek drainage. So to start out, I'm going to actually do a roll call of the advisory council members. And if you'd please let me know if you're in attendance, we can move forward. We'll know whether or not we have the full quorum. I'm going to start out with the Department of Interior. And Jackie and Jake, are you guys on the line?
Jackie LaBelle is here.
Jake Martin here too.
And I would like to note that Jake Martin is with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is his first advisory council meeting. He's taken over for Karen Nelson with the Fish and Wildlife Service, who recently retired. From the Confederated and Salish Kootenai Tribes, Mary Price, are you on the line?
Yes, Doug. Mary Price is present.
And DNRC.
Millie Hefner's here.
Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Nathan Cook is here from FWP.
Department of Environmental Quality. Joel, are you on? Okay, we'll come back to Joel. Maggie.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Sue. Sue Peterson, are you on? Okay. Jim Davidson.
I'm on.
Mick Ringsack. Mick, are you on? Okay. Jim Cambage. How about Kay? Kay, I think I saw you come on.
Kay Eccleston, I'm here.
Thank you. And I see that Maureen has made it.
Yep, I'm here.
All right, good. And now I'm going to turn it over to, and I saw Bill on, and Bill, do you have any thing to say?
No, I'm just here online, and welcome everybody here. Thanks everybody for making the effort to make this happen. Thanks again to NRD for all your work in organizing this in the complex situation we're in. And I look forward to lots of information today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bill. So a couple of updates with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I would like to introduce, although he's not with us today, Ray Vinke was hired by the program earlier this summer, or last summer now, to fill the Butte position that Pat Canine previously was located in. Ray will be working mostly on the Butte Area 1 restoration plan implementation, but he'll also be helping out in the basin. Ray has some previous experience in the Upper Clark Fork as a FWP biologist out of the Peaburg area, and was also instrumental in working with the council and the program on development of the terrestrial prioritization plan. But we do have the Parrot Phase 2 project is currently out on the street for contractors to bid on, and they're having their big construction walkthrough today, and Ray is taking part in that, so he is not able to be with us. The one initial action item or thing that the council needs to deal with is the approval of the April 20th minutes. We did provide these to the council, I guess, last night. We forgot to put them into the packet, but they are a recording. So it's actually the verbatim minutes of what was said in April. And so we will need to seek the council's approval of those minutes.
Do you have a motion, please?
This is Maureen, and I move to accept the April 2020 recording.
Is there a second?
Go ahead, Kay. Kay, are you seconding those?
Yes, I was seconding. Sorry, I raised the hand icon, but forgot the microphone.
Okay, that's fine. And one of the things that we're going to do here that's worked out well with another council that we work with is that I will actually read out each of the voting members' names, and if you could just unmute yourself and tell me your vote on this, it actually works out very well for how to step through the voting process. So I'll start with Jackie.
I voted in favor, yes.
Okay, Maggie,
In favor.
Susan, not hearing Susan.
I'm in favor, Sue Peterson.
Okay, thank you. Jim Davidson.
Yes.
Kay, Kay, you seconded. Kay.
Aye.
Okay. And Maureen
Aye.
and Bill. Bill, did you vote on that or? Okay. I will do one more last call. Did Jim Cambich or Mick Ringsack happen to join us? Okay. All right. I guess they have not made it yet. So now we're going to move to the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program funding amendment. That is an action item for the council. Shannon Gilski will be giving a summary of the amendment and the response to comments. And once again, I'd ask everybody to mute themselves as Shannon presents her evaluation, and then we'll do questions following her presentation.
I have a muffin if you want, Randy. Good.
It looks like Mary Price has her hand raised. I don't know if she has a question before we get started.
Go ahead, Mary.
Yes, Doug, I believe you overlooked me on the last vote, and I do vote yes.
Oh, I am sorry, Mary. Thank you for catching me on that.
No problem. Thank you.
All righty, Miranda, if you could take me to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you. So as Doug mentioned, I'm Shannon, Administrative Specialist for NRDP, and I'm the project manager for the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program. And so we'll move on to the next slide. So today I am bringing in front of the council the proposed CFWEP, the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program funding amendment for a vote. The proposed amendment is to allocate funding of $1 million of the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund grant project excess to the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program Education Fund. And I just want to let everyone know and remind them that this million is part of the reconciled excess dollars we had from closed out grants. And so that million is coming out of that. It's for projects that we'd closed out and had remaining funds for. So we put it out for public comment, and that was a 30-day public comment period that ended September 10th. It was advertised per NRDP standard practice, which included sending it out to the basin newspapers, posting it on our website, and sending it out to our email list. So this funding will be consistent with the amendment and section 7.2 of the process plan, with the funds, like I said, to be transferred from the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund to the Education Fund. Next slide, please. NRDP received a total of 25 comment letters. One additional letter was received late. All the comment letters were supportive. They included some key comments here that I just wanted to share with everyone. The program teaches both vital science and history content to the students who are the future stewards of our community resources. Education about the restoration and remediation of the watershed is just as important as the restoration itself, so that future generations can continue to benefit and be recognized for the newly restored and remediated land. Sorry about that. That pop-up blocked my text there. Anyway, another key comment was it puts science in their hands and gives them tools to make educated predictions and conclusions. So as you can see, there's a theme here of positive comments and supportive comments. Next slide, please. NRDP's funding recommendation is as follows. NRDP recommends allocating $1 million of the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund grant project excess to the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program, CFWEP Education Fund. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Rosbeck, and we will go from there if there are any questions.
Yes, are there any questions from the council, please? I don't see any. I can't tell whether anybody's got any comments.
Dave, his hand.
Yeah, I have a question on the ability to be able to get into the school. I know there was a submission last spring. As COVID continues this year, are the programs going to be able to be held? Or what's the projection on that?
So we have Raylan Brandel on the line. I believe, Raylan, I will field that question to you.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks for the question, Jim. We've actually, it's been a little bit of community dependent, if you will. So for example, we've been able to be in Drummond and we're scheduled for Deer Lodge coming up. Here in Butte, we are doing things via Zoom, and the teachers are taking on the mantle of doing the experiential activities with their students. And then we've created a whole series of online modules for our students. So we've created a series of ArcGIS story maps that the kids are using in the classroom, and those are available on our website if any of the council members would like to click through those and look at them. In Missoula, it's been a little bit tougher. They've been mostly online, but again, our Missoula team is working with the teachers locally to provide the content. For the spring, our teachers have so far invited us to be in person unless there's any changes to the school rules.
Maureen has a comment or question next.
I have two questions.
Kidding me.
Can you please remember to mute yourself? Thank you.
I have two questions, and one of my first question is just based on age, which is that we did the staff is going to have to help me out with this, but we did a large specialized transfer of money to CFWEP, and I want to be clear that I think CFWEP is a great organization and doing good work. But we did a large transfer a number of years ago, and that was supposed to be it. So that is question one, or comment one, I guess. And the question part would be, when did we do that? And I guess that's for staff. And then the second question I have is also for staff, which is when did staff is recommending this, and I wondered if they recommended or if they considered taking it from any other funds. Thank you.
So Maureen, this is Doug. Doug, I will answer that question. So the 2012 Upper Clark Fork River Basin Interim Restoration Process Plan was the plan that appropriated funds to or from the aquatic, terrestrial, and groundwater allocations to be allocated to or to be moved to a separate fund for the education fund to be held separately, and that was $4 million. And these were earmarked for long-term funding for the CWIP program for at least 10 years, beginning in fiscal year 2014, and for no longer than 20 years. So that was the provisions that were in the upper in the final process plan. So that's the answer to your first question. The answer to your second question is, as far as funding that is available unallocated in the Upper Clark Fork. So when this question came to us early this year, we were asked to look at it, and looking at unallocated restoration funds, we knew that there were some leftover funding in the grants program or from the grants program that was unspent. Projects that had been completed, their contracts had been finalized and closed out, but there were some dollars left over in some of those grants that had been previously approved. So when Shannon reconciled those, we had some funding available, and that's where we proposed, since those funds were unallocated, we proposed funds be allocated to additional funding to the education program. Do you have any follow-up to that or other questions on that?
I see Kay has her hand raised.
I'm just assuming that I can go ahead and ask this question.
Yes, you can, Kay. Yeah.
When Raylyn was giving that brief recap, she mentioned Butte, Deer Lodge, Drummond, Missoula. I didn't hear any mention of the Anaconda School District. So I was wondering what kind of outreach CFWEP has done to involve the Anaconda schools.
Thank you, Kay, for the question. Anaconda is our spring. We usually divide our year into two halves, the fall semester and the spring semester, and Anaconda is slated for the spring. And like I said, all of our spring schools have tentatively said that they will be seeing us in person. If they are unable to see in person, then we will adapt to providing the story maps and doing the Zoom meetings, and then if we can possibly get the students out some other way. That's our intention with Anaconda. We do have several teachers that have been with us at Anaconda for a long time, and so they've kind of been adapting the curriculum already and using some of that work in their classrooms right now as they've been in and out of school.
Doug, Jackie has her hand raised next.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Hi, this is Jackie Lavelle. First is a comment. Kudos to you if you were able to get Deer Lodge schools on board. We've actually been trying to get them to do field trips or education programs, and they are quite overwhelmed. So if you've been able to work something out, you have some magic going there. So kudos to you for being able to figure out a way to help them do the job of education. The other question, the question I have is about other funding sources. Is this your only source of funding, and what happens if you don't get this $1 million?
Doug, would you like me to answer that question?
Yes, please, Raylan.
Okay. So thank you for the question, Jackie. We have, right now, our portfolio is about 60% in contracts, which this is one of the contracts that is included in that 60%. And then 40% in other fundings, and that is grant programs. We have a National Institute of Health grant, and we have an EPA grant that's a match to the NRD program right now. And then tiny sliver, we're trying to grow this sliver, but we have about 1% in private foundations and private donations from individuals. So we're trying to diversify the funding so that it's more balanced. And then to answer the question of what happens if we don't get this funding, is that the programming from the NRD standpoint would end sooner. We're going to meet that 2024 mark, so to speak, with the way that we've been spending in our allocations, or what it looks like. And then we would run out of funds sooner if we're not able to find other sources to replace the funding that we receive from NRD every year.
Maureen has her hand raised.
Go ahead, Maureen.
Thank you. This is Maureen Connor, and again, I do support this program, but I'm a little concerned because we did this, and by what Doug told us, the soonest we should be reconsidering this would be in 2022. So I guess my take on this is that they're having some funding struggles, but I just want to point out that that's what we did, and if the council chooses to recommend a change to that, that's okay. But I think we need to consider how we change that previous work to consider this.
Doug, can you clarify that? I'm not sure that that's what I heard you say. I thought it was 20 years.
Well, the funding that was earmarked and put into a separate fund in 2012. Actually, it was put into the fund, and Shannon, correct me if I'm wrong. It was approved in the 2012 process plan. It was put into a separate fund from the interest generated from the Aquatic and from the restoration fund in years 2013 and 2014. And that was earmarked, and that was put into the education fund to last for at least 10 years, beginning in fiscal year 2014. So yes, it was put in 2013 and 14, but it was to last 10 years, but no longer than 20. That's the process. That's the way the wording in the process plan is, Bill.
Davison is next.
Yeah, Doug, maybe this goes back to some funding areas that we had talked about, I would say over a year ago, when the council had talked about setting up a $6 million fund for other projects, including recreation and some long-term interpretive projects of some of the restoration activities that had gone on. And then it was determined that there wasn't funding for that we had to hold off on funding. So what is different now to be able to find $1 million for this when there wasn't the $6 million that we had recommended way back when?
I'm sorry, Jim. I don't recall. I don't recall the $6 million allocation that you're talking about or request.
We ended up not doing the $6 million allocation, but that was a number that was talked about at one of the meetings down in Deer Lodge. And I know this was about the time that Bill was looking at some of the greenway stuff. Anaconda Deer Lodge was looking at some interpretive trails around Stuckey Ridge and also down around Warm Springs Creek. I think Deer Lodge was looking at doing some planning for trails from Deer Lodge to Garrison. That figure would come up, and then it was like, well, there's not enough money to even look at any of those things.
And now I recall that. So that was during the last revision, and that was a consideration of looking at additional recreation projects. And it was the council's recommendation, as I recall, that they wanted to focus on the priority aquatic and terrestrial resources and not recreation. So I believe, because the $6 million, there was an original allocation of $6.5 million in the 2012 restoration plan to recreation. I believe that is the allocation that you were talking about. At that point in time, we were talking about allocating the interest to priority projects during that revision. And I don't believe we had considered the unspent the grant funds at that point in time, but that's my understanding of that.
Jackie has another question or comment.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Hi, this is Jackie Lavelle. I'm just going to follow up a little bit with my last question. Shannon, I think you answered it before when I asked about what happens when the money runs out, and you said it would run out in 2024. But I didn't get a sense of what the money running out means. I mean, 4 years away is kind of a hard guess. I mean, I can tell you for my own budget, I can't tell you what 2024 is going to look like, but are you saying that means you cancel programs, you fire people? What are the impacts? Or is that too speculative because it is too far away?
Shannon, I think it was me, Raylyn, that was answering that question from Jackie. Would you like me to take that?
Yes, please.
Raylyn.
So there's a couple of things here too with the funding allocation. If I can go back in time a little bit, one of the comments made was that perhaps we're in trouble with our funding, and we've been very diligent with saving money from year to year and making sure that we have cost savings and that we're not expending the maximum budget requests that we make every year. And I know that Shannon can probably review those for you if you're interested. However, when the clock started and we were spending from this fund, Montana Tech had a different impression of when the spend down would begin compared to NRD. And it was partially because we were going through a director change at the time. Matt Vincent was leaving and I was taking over, and all sorts of, I guess you could say institutional knowledge wasn't getting passed down. So the date that we started spending was different from when Montana Tech thought that we were spending. We thought we were finishing out 1 year of a contract and then beginning to spend down the fund. Anyway, all of that aside, that kind of put us in a little bit of a situation where our projections, as you're saying, Jackie, were a little bit askance. And so we had to start making some changes to programming and changes within our staffing structure to make sure that we could meet that deadline and not overspend before the end of the contracting period. What we would have to do in 2024, what we'd have to do at the end of the funds is, if I cannot replace those funds, and right now in the budget, when you look at our total operating costs for a year, NRD's allocation is approximately 50% of our budget overall, the other 50% coming from those other sources that I've mentioned. It puts us in the position to decide, like you were saying, do we lay off staff? Do we stop doing the programming for the schools that have now virtually become dependent on that programming? What do we have to do to make ends meet, if you will? We've been, like I said, working extremely hard to become less and less reliant upon NRD funding, to become less publicly funded and be more balanced. One of the issues that we're running into with our foundation requests right now is that because we are so publicly funded, they don't want to look at us. So it's kind of like a cat and mouse game in a way, in that we have to be less publicly funded to get private funds, but yet we can't get private funds because we're publicly funded. And so it's just the challenge of making that work. Worst case scenario, we would be laying off staff. We would be ending programming. Our intention is to be working as hard as we can to avoid that future. And we have an incredible team behind us, and we have a lot of effort built into the strategic planning for how to raise funds at this point.
Thank you.
Kay has a comment or question next.
Please, Kay.
Kay Eccleston, just given what's been said, in particular Maureen's question, so this money that was left over from, leftovers from approved projects, first, a couple, maybe a two-part question. Were any other projects considered, as a recipient of this leftover money? So, would this money have been available to other grant recipients or additional grant requests? Given that what I'm hearing is that the allocation back in 12-13, 13-14 funded CFWEP through 2024. I guess I'm just wondering, because they're funded until 2024, why CFWEP, why now, and why not, was anything else considered?
So this is Doug Kay. To answer your question on the grants, the leftover grant funding, is that there were several projects, and there are several grant projects that are still being that we still have funds encumbered for and allocated to. So the grants program ended in 2011, and some of these some of the funding was not known to be available until we reconciled when the grants started to close out. So no, the grants program we were not running a grants program as we had from 2001 through 2011 to allocate to additional projects. If these funds were to be allocated in the future, they probably could have been allocated or would be allocated through a plan revision process to additional aquatic and terrestrial resources types things. But no other grant projects were shorted from the availability of funding. For the follow-up to the 2024, I'll turn that over to Raylyn.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I think I need Shannon to maybe do some of the forecasting on the budget, because I know in our conversations we won't make the entire year of the school year of 23 to 24 as the projections are looking at right now.
That's correct, Raylyn. This money is needed to go past 2022. And potentially even into 2023. CFWEP spends roughly $500,000 a year, and so that's exactly right. This would be necessary to continue into 2024.
Yeah, so if we don't change that funding profile, if the other funds don't come in, that's again the worst case scenario. Possibly running out in the school year of 2022-23.
Mary Price has her hand raised.
Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. This is Mary Price. I think this discussion around the budget is really an important one to have. I think it just highlights the care with which the Advisory Council considers all funding requests, because we all recognize that we have a limited restoration fund and much work to do. With that said, though, I'm sitting here thinking of the kids that are the recipients of this program, and particularly in this really challenging time we're in, where state budgets and school budgets and family budgets are so limited. And I can envision that for many schools and students, this program is really helpful and gives the students some hope, something to look forward to. And I also think that I can think of no better expenditure than to educate the young people of this basin about the history of what has happened here and what we're trying to accomplish. Because if we don't have this next generation that understands what happened and why we're doing the work we're doing today, you know, it could very well all be undone in the future. And I don't think that's what any of us want. I mean, I look around to my fellow AC members and I see a very dedicated group. So, you know, I think the budget discussion is an important one to have, but I think we need to not lose sight of what the purpose of this program is and the students who are going through a very, very difficult time right now. So, thank you.
So are there any other questions from the council members on this issue?
This is Bill. Can I make a comment? I don't have a question.
Yes, please, Bill.
Yeah, I want to echo what Mary said. I do think it's important that we look at these budgets, but you know, we have from day one recognized the incredible value, and we had a very detailed presentation, I think this spring, about the numbers of students that are affected by these programs. I mean, Raylyn, you can tell me, I don't remember the numbers, but it's in terms of the total student population of this drainage, we're impacting a huge percentage. And as Mary said, this is part of our heritage, and this is, you know, we don't get enough in the schools of sort of Montana history, and this is certainly Clark Fork Valley history that's hugely important. And I've lived here a long time, and it was only recently actually that I learned a lot more about the history of Butte and mining in Butte and smelting in Anaconda as a result of some litigation I was in. And it's a remarkable history that we need to know about, and our children need to know about. And I just feel, you know, yeah, this is a very, very hard time. I mean, COVID has affected everybody. And I am sure that, and I trust Ray Lynn is working just unbelievably hard to find the money. But it, you know, I mean, I know I donated an awful lot of money, and this morning, instead of writing checks to environmental groups, I was writing checks to the food bank. Because the situation of economics and charitable donations has completely changed. And I think we owe it to this program, which we have supported incredibly well over the years, and the impact of, I'd like to hear the numbers from Ray Lynn. She can verify this, but it's in the thousands of students. And recently, as a result of Mary's comments, we've expanded it into the tribe schools as well. So I just feel very, very strongly that, you know, this is a hard time for us to be pulling the rug out from a program that we have supported and have seen the work that has been done from this program for many, many years. Thank you.
I can provide the student numbers if the council would so like those now. We've served our and this was at the end of the school year in May of last May. So we didn't count the students that are that we saw in the fall, and then our online students so far this year. But we've served 64,311 students to date. We've served 773 teachers to date, provided 218,890 contact hours for our students, and have been in 35 Montana communities. I'd like to point out too that kind of the metamorphosis that we've made in this last semester has been incredible for us, because our online videos that we've created, the story maps that we've created, all of that work is now going well beyond the borders of Montana and is being downloaded in communities all over the country now. And so I think that's also a testimony to the investments that you all have made in ensuring a scientifically literate citizenry. And we take that call to action very earnestly and very seriously. So I really appreciate the comments and the questions to help us clarify where we're positioned at this point in time. Thank you.
Maureen has a comment or question.
Please, Maureen.
Hello, this is Maureen again. And it sounds, I guess one of the things that I'm interested, if the council chooses to recommend this request, is because it's clearly not within what we already have written, is the rationale for the excursion. My concern with that is the future. So one of you, you know, smart people that knows how to do this stuff, I would like to hear that rationale included, you know, in the motion and why. I don't want this, and I agree with everything about CFWEP being an important organization for the Upper Clark Fork. I agree with all that, but to keep an eye on the future, and since this is an excursion from a past recommendation of the council, I would like to see that knitted up really well as to the why, and to not have it be a big door opener necessarily for the future. Thank you.
This is Bill again. Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't we previously vote to approve this, to send it out to public comment last spring?
Yes, Bill, this proposal did go out for public comment late summer, early fall.
But didn't we have a vote to send it for public comment?
No, that's not in the procedures at this
Okay.
point. What we did is we presented the CWIP budget last April, and we
Right.
identified that we were looking at additional funding sources at that time.
Okay, well, the problem I have, I think that's a good idea, Maureen. I just don't know how we're going to get language, ad hoc language that creates potential problems later just on the fly without, you know, do we have a lawyer here that can write additional language? I'm worried about the process. I'm certainly not taking that responsibility.
Miranda, can you go to the next slide, please?
It looks like Mary Price has a question or comment.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking back to the Parrot Fund approval. I don't recall exactly what we did in that instance. And if anything, if that could be a model for some language here.
Maureen has another question or comment.
Yes, go ahead, Maureen.
Yeah, Mary, that's a good idea. I just would suggest, I think this is really important because of for the future and ensuring that the fund is directed where it should go. And I don't really have an argument that CFWEP isn't a valid fundee, I guess. My concern is really with the process and not wanting to open the door to other less worthy things, I guess. So I just would suggest that if the council and staff or whomever agreed with me on this, that we, take a breath and look at the process and come back at the next meeting with some language that explains the why and wherefore. Thank you.
I think there's a bit of a timing problem here because we have a TRC meeting scheduled in December to make the final decision on that. I don't think we want to wait till another AC meeting to do this, is my concern. Because I think that's the primary item for the TRC meeting in December, and that would throw that off. So, I think the exceptional circumstances here are COVID, among other things, and changes in funding priorities among various institutional funders. I don't know how to write language about that, though, on the fly. Is there some other, can we do another meeting before the TRC, Doug?
I think that would be very difficult at this point, Bill. The TRC meetings on December 1st and next week being Thanksgiving week is going to be difficult. Actually, next to impossible, I would say.
Yeah, and since we have an entire, the whole TRC is going to change after January. Do you have any language you would like to put in, Maureen? Some recognition that this is exceptional circumstances, that I don't know. I don't know how to do it in a way that's going to accomplish that without messing up the funding and making the future funding for CFWEP highly uncertain with a new TRC, and I just don't know how this was, from a procedural timing point of view, how we can accomplish this.
And Bill, this is Doug. If you'd it'd be okay, I did bring up the parrot motion language. And what I have, and Mary, I'm not sure if this is what you were talking about, but at the end of the parrot motion language, allocating the 8 out of the 16.5, allocating 8 to the for the greenway set aside to the aquatic and terrestrial reserves. And then the 8.5 would be allocated to the parrot project, approved by the governor with the caveat that this amount would be reimbursed to the extent feasible. Is that's the only language I see in the parrot amendment that has anything about that kind of different that the AC provided, that the extent feasible at the end.
This is Mary Price. Well, I couldn't recall exactly what the motion was, Doug, and that language probably wouldn't fit in this circumstance. So, yeah, thank you, Doug.
Kay Eccleston has a comment or question.
Go ahead, Kay.
Kay Eccleston, would this be too simplistic to just simply amend this possible motion language to read motion to allocate one-time funding in the amount of?
Yes, we could do that. Yeah, we provided this motion language as a as possible, and that can be revised as the council would agree.
I think, yeah, this is Bill again. I think that's a really good idea, Kay. I think that's a really good idea. I would add to it a one-time allocation based upon the exceptional circumstances of the epidemic and funding difficulties for outside funding difficulties for the program or something like that.
Mary Price has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Bill, what about adding language that this one-time funding due to extraordinary circumstances does not constitute a change to the funding plan, or to make it really clear that we're not opening that door that I think Maureen is right to point out.
Yes. I think you should be the lawyer here, Mary, not me.
Well, if that language would work.
I think it's excellent. If Miranda or Doug, can you kind of put that into a motion that, I don't know how we're going to look at it, but maybe read it to us?
Yeah, I could do that. Mary, could you restate that?
Sure. So I'll try and summarize what I thought I heard Kay and Bill say. A motion to allocate one-time funding due to extraordinary circumstances. And then at the end, after CFWEP, at the end of the sentence, or maybe a second sentence, that this one-time allocation does not constitute an amendment to the, I'm not sure which plan we want to reference here, but whatever the appropriate plan to reference would be.
We could put the current process plan.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So Mary, that would still give the council and the TRC the ability to review and approve the budgets, biannual budgets of the CWIP program by leaving that in there.
Can you guys see this Word document? Is that the language you were thinking?
Yeah. I can see it. Maureen, do you have any further comment on this, looking at this language?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a step in the right direction. I would read it as, I move to allocate one-time funding due to extraordinary circumstances. And I would fluff that up a little bit in terms of educational funding and the pandemic. I mean, I would add what the extraordinary circumstances were.
Funding difficulties due to pandemic.
Yep. Something like that, just to make it clear that there's a reason that this is being done now.
Yeah, I think, that. Any other comments on the language as it sits here in front of us?
I would just add this motion does not, I don't know if constitute a change to the current process plan.
Yeah, that's at the bottom. Do you see it on screen?
Yes.
Okay, it's on there.
What's the date on that process plan? I guess I'd like to see that.
That would be the 2012 final process plan.
Yeah, that's important.
And then the motion should, just being the language person, language police here, should say, I move.
Okay, so any other comments on the language?
Okay. Do we need to, excuse me, Bill, do we need to say, I move to allocate one-time funding? Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, the amount's in there. Disregard.
Okay, do we have somebody want to make this motion?
I'll make the motion, Bill. This is Mary Price.
And is there a second?
I'll second it.
Maureen seconds. Okay, do we have, sorry.
Sue Peterson here, I would second it.
Okay. So do we have any comments from any public comment on the motion?
Dory has a comment or question.
Please state your name and your comment. Go ahead with your comment. Please state your name and state your comment, please. So we can't hear you. If you're muted, please unmute and state your name and your comment. So we didn't hear that comment. So it does any other members of the public besides the, other folks besides the advisory council, does anybody else have a comment on the CWIP funding amendment and motion? If you would please raise your hand or let us know you have a comment. Go ahead, Dory, please comment. Dory, you may still be muted. We're not hearing you. So we are having difficulty hearing Dory's comment. Does anybody else have any comments on this motion or this project? So one last time, does anybody else have any comments on this motion or this project from the public? All right. From that, Bill, seeing that there are no more comments, I will poll the AC for their votes.
All right.
All right. Jackie from the Department of Interior.
I vote in favor.
Mary, the Salish Kootenai Tribes.
Yep. Mary Price votes yes.
Maggie Schmidt.
In favor.
Sue Peterson. Sue, what was your vote again?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Jim
Yeah, thank you.
Davidson.
Jim Davidson votes no.
And I don't believe Mick is on. Mick, did you happen to join us, Mick? Okay, Jim Cambridge, did you happen to join? Okay, we'll go to Kay.
Doug, I'm going to abstain.
Okay, Maureen.
Aye.
And Bill.
Aye.
All right. Thank you. So that does conclude the CWIP funding. The staff and Bill will present this to the Trustee Restoration Council on December 1st. If anybody is interested in joining in on that meeting will also be held virtually from 2 to 4 o'clock on December 1st. So moving forward into the agenda, the next are informational presentations. First off, we have the Clark Fork River remediation and restoration update that Joel Chavez and Bo Downing will provide. And we'd ask that the council hold their questions until after both presentations are done. They're both short presentations, because Bo may answer some of the questions you may have of Joel. But now we'll turn it over to Joel to give an update on the DEQ remediation. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yes, we can, Joel.
Okay, so I just wanted to give an update on where we're currently at with the remedial Clark Fork River, and I think the first slide, Miranda, would be great. Right, so here is a map that shows reach A of the operable unit, which is really where the remedial effort is focused. starting at the upstream end at Warm Springs. Phase 1 and 2 are done, and then 5 and 6 are done. And we're currently down at the Grant Coors National Historic Site. We've been there since late 2018. We're about finishing that up right now. We're done hauling contaminants. We're planting some more vegetation right now as I speak, and we hopefully will get that done at the end of this calendar year. It's been kind of a weather challenge down there with some long springs, some flooding, high water, no real damage, but it's just been some delays, weather mostly, but that effort is winding down. So our next destination is phase 3, which is just downstream from Warm Springs Pond. So 1 and 2 are done, and the next one is 3. And I think the next slide actually shows that activity planned. Yeah. So this is Grant Coors Ranch again. I'm sorry. Anyway, this shows actually Grant Coors Ranch, which is fine. A couple miles of stream, and you can see the operable unit, the remediation boundary in there. What we've done, just to digress a little more, we've removed close to 400,000 cubic yards of contaminants, and like I said, we're winding that down and heading up for phase 3. So the next slide. And here's just a typical, this is Grant Coors Ranch again, but this is contaminant removal. The stream side rod focuses on the banks and the floodplain, and the DQ is going out to the 100-year meander width, but this is pretty cool, typical excavation, averages a couple feet thick. The next slide. And here is basically what it looks like when it's just been completed. And another one, I think, Miranda. And here's just vegetation. This is Grant Coors Ranch once again. This is just vegetation we planted last fall, I believe. So it's starting to come up pretty good. So as I said, our next destination is phase 3, and I think the next slide does show that. It's mostly on Lambert's and to some degree Kelly's ranch. The design is done. We've got some preliminary minor comments back from the EPA. They have review and approval process. Their comments were they're fine, no big thing. So we're getting that reviewed. It's legal right now. We just got the document back from the engineers night before last. So that part is about ready to go out. The part that is not in there is the revegetation, and DQ right now is working with NRD for a joint revegetation plan on that. I've been talking to Bo on and off for the last month, and we just talked Monday morning, and I think we're just about there with that. So the revegetation will be more like a state effort as opposed to simply a DQ remedy effort. It'll be a remedy restoration effort, and it'll be a joint state effort. That won't, waiting for that plan to get, it also has to be approved by the EPA. We're not necessarily held up for that because we won't be planting anything until early next fall. But if we can get the plan through legal and we can physically show that site for a job walkthrough, we will put it out to bid just as soon as we can, and we'll let that bid so work can begin just as soon as conditions permit next spring. So that's really where we're at right now. There's been some other, NRD's been doing some other sampling that hasn't been done to date up and down the corridor. I think Bo will probably talk about that. And like Doug said, when Bo's complete, I'll be happy to answer any questions. But in a nutshell, that is just exactly where we're at.
Are there any questions from the council? I can't tell.
Yeah, actually, Bill, we were going to wait for questions.
Oh, okay. I thought after each presentation I were.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
this one's a little different because Bo and Joel overlap so much that.
Okay, that's fine. I thought we were talking after each presentation. I'm sorry.
So if Bo can go now, then we can ask questions, and they're probably just.
Okay, this is Bo Downing with the Natural Resource Damage Program. And I'm going to give you an update on the Clark Fork River restoration of the main stem of the Clark Fork. And I'm going to base it mostly around an effort we've undertaken starting in 2019 and should have wrapped up here by the end of 2020. And that's a revised restoration plan for the Clark Fork River Aquatic and Riparian Resources. So in 2007, a revised restoration plan for the main stem Clark Fork River operable unit was written. It was written based on the EPA record of decision and had lots of restoration actions that have since been incorporated into an explanation of significant difference that DEQ did. So a lot of what Joel just showed, those large scale, high volume tailings removals from the stream banks and the floodplains used to be in our restoration plan, but now are being undertaken by DEQ as part of Remedy. So based on that and things we've learned over the last 13 or 14 years, NRDP, working with our various stakeholders, went out and undertook the process to revise that 2007 plan. And I'm going to summarize what those changes are today. It's important to note that this is for the main stem of the Clark Fork River, the Clark Fork River operable unit. So this restoration plan is a standalone plan. It is not tied to the restoration plan that the advisory council oversees from the aquatic and terrestrial restoration work that we do, the in-stream flow and all those things. So this is a different plan that addresses the restoration of the main stem Clark Fork River and the riparian resources that are adjacent to it. So next slide, please, Miranda. So just to recap, the upper Clark Fork, the Clark Fork River operable unit stretches from Warm Springs Ponds downstream to Tura. In the 2008 settlement with the responsible party, $26.7 million was the restoration settlement amount for that operable unit, and we're focused on that Reach A for a lot of this work, because that's where the highest volumes of tailings are, and that stretches from Warm Springs down to Garrison. Next slide, please. So in that original 2007 restoration plan, it defined the restoration goals and objectives for the main stem of the Clark Fork River. The 5 items here are the goals, and then there were very specific objectives that were identified to help meet these restoration goals that build into what we've done to determine restoration actions that would help us achieve those goals and objectives. But quickly, the 5 main restoration goals in that 2007 plan that are carried forward into the 2020 revision are to restore the aquatic resources in the Clark Fork River to baseline conditions. Some of those objectives are water quality, removal of contaminated sediments and other things, restore the terrestrial habitat to baseline conditions along the riparian zones and floodplains of the Clark Fork River. There's a vegetative component to that and some other objectives that are in the 2007 and the 2020 revision to the plan. Offset the residual effects to flora and fauna from hazardous substances that are not eliminated from the aquatic ecosystem. And then we also want to maximize the long-term beneficial effects and cost effectiveness of restoration activities and improve the natural aesthetic values of the Clark Fork River. So next slide, please, Miranda. So in order to move from the 2007 plan and revise it to reflect conditions in 2020, NRDP with a couple of consultants and FWP identified potential restoration actions that would help us meet those goals and objectives that I just outlined before. We broke those out into priority tiers. Tier 1 actions are restoration actions that are directly integrated with remedy. So like Joel just mentioned, NRDP and DEQ are taking on revegetation in phase 3 together. So that's an example of what would have been a priority tier 1 action because of direct integration. And then tier 2 actions are restoration actions that are taken outside of remedy. So they're standalone actions that aren't directly integrated with DEQ. After identifying those priority tiers, we went through and developed ranking criteria. And it's important to note that that ranking criteria is tied back directly to the federal regulations that define how we have to evaluate restoration actions. So that's tied to legal criteria when we're ranking those specific restoration actions. And then what all that process did is it resulted in a list of restoration actions that we wanted to include in an update to the restoration plan here in 2020. So next slide, please. So this is a list of the restoration actions that were identified through that prioritization process. And so you can see that there's a priority tier 1 and 2. I've already mentioned those. There is a priority tier 3. Those are actions that occurred outside of the Clark Fork River proper and occurred in the Blackfoot River drainage, and most of those have been completed or are ongoing. So they're here because they were in the 2007 plan, but our focus is really on how we rank and how we identify and rank the priority tier 1 and 2 actions for the main stem Clark Fork. So I won't read this entire list, but you can see there are a handful of them that directly integrate with remedy, and then a half dozen or so that would occur outside of remediation. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, we ranked and scored each restoration action based on the regulations that govern how you develop and evaluate those actions for a restoration plan. So you can see that some of the tier 1 actions, at least one of them ranks lower than some of the tier 2 restoration actions. But one thing I want to point out is this ranking and scoring helps kind of identify reach scale or operable unit scale restoration actions. But what it really does is it creates a toolkit for NRDP to use to address phases independently and determine what's the most cost-effective and best restoration actions for a given reach or sub-reach of the of the main stem Clark Fork River. So just because they rank a certain way here doesn't necessarily mean that that highest ranked action would be the first one we go to in all phases. It's used more as a tool to determine what the reach scale or all of reach A, B, and C actions would have been, with a focus on reach A. Next slide, please. So as part of that prioritization process, and then in the 2020 revision to the restoration plan, we are required to do an alternatives analysis. So there was a method for evaluating how each of these restoration actions met certain criteria. And when it was all said and done, it was determined that if we choose to implement all of these actions in one form or another, that it would provide the best outcome, and that's alternative 3. Next slide, please. And so the process for implementing the restoration plan, I want to point out that the 2007 plan, where the restoration actions are still applicable, is being implemented as we speak. Like Joel said, we've been working together for months. The Natural Resource Damage Program went out and did some interim measures this summer on phase 3 to protect some of the fisheries resources. We've started to investigate some of the contaminant data gaps. So we're operating under the 2007 plan, but the process for moving forward under the revised 2020 restoration plan is that we would identify specific restoration projects, whether they be tier 1 restoration actions integrated with DEQ, or standalone actions in that tier 2 category. We look for and identify those restoration projects. We evaluate those opportunities. We develop restoration designs and bid packages. If it's something that's incorporated and integrated with DEQ, then we work with them to incorporate that in, so it's one bid package, so that it's one state project. If it's something that NRDP is doing alone, then it would be that we would develop the design in our own bid package. We complete the environmental compliance, and we implement those restoration projects, and then we move to a monitoring and adaptive management phase. So that's kind of how we've done things in the past and how we look to implement the plan into the future. And I think that's my last slide, correct, Miranda?
Yeah. So now we will take questions from the council for Bo and Joel. I will let folks know that the restoration plan was put out for public comment. We did provide it to our mailing list and notified the basin newspapers about the comment period, and we did also hold a public meeting on that back in late October. So if there are any questions of Bo and Joel, please raise your hand or let us know you have a question. Looks like Mary has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. This is Mary Price. I have this question's for Joel. Joel, of the total miles of the Clark Fork operable unit, how many miles have been remediated? And of the remainder, what's your anticipated completion date?
Well, let's see what's been remediated to. About 8, I think, river miles, Mary. And let's see. Oh, I think probably 12 or so really to go. I think the stuff below Deer Lodge, we're waiting to see what NRD really in their samples. We're thinking probably not as big an issue down there, but honestly, it's not going to go real fast. Money isn't there for it to go real fast. So I think, right now you're looking at least 15 years. And it's just a function of we just can't spend down the principal right now. So that's the time factor. We could do it faster, but it just don't have money. So at least 15 years, Mary, honestly.
Okay, thanks, Joel.
Yep.
So this is Doug. One of the things I'll expand on a little bit what Joel talked about is that this last summer, NRD and Brian led this effort. Working with DEQ, we hired a contractor to go out and actually test pit all the remaining phases of the Clark Fork all the way down to Garrison. That is something that has never been done before. EPA in the remedial investigation did not do that. And that information is actually going to provide the state with a great deal of data to help the state provide us, develop a plan for how best to address the rest of Reach A, because actually, as Joel indicated, downstream of Deer Lodge there was a lot of uncertainty of how much contamination is really in that floodplain. But we do have that information now, and we'll be working on that over the winter to evaluate that and come up with a state plan for how to address it. Are there any other questions of Joel or Bo? Seeing no other council questions, are there any questions from the public for Joel or Bo? Got a quiet group out there, Bill. So seeing that there's no other questions, if you do have questions, please let us know. We can contact everybody or get you linked up with people if you do have questions you want to follow up with us on. With that, Bill, I'd like to move on to the financial report, and Shannon.
That's good for me.
So go ahead, Shannon.
Yep, this is Shannon, back here now with the Upper Clark Fork River Restoration Fund financial update. Next slide, Miranda. So council members and perhaps those of you from the public who've seen this before, this is the typical layout I provide each year to just give everyone a high level overview of the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Fund. And so this spreadsheet is broken down in 3 different sections delineated by the gray bar there. So let's start with the first section, just as a brief recap. That includes the original restoration plan allocation of 170 million, and then our numbers for updating to the cash invested cash methodology, which we did back in fiscal year 18. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that today in the interest of time, but if anybody has any questions about that, I'm always happy to take those and explain. So let's move on to the second section of the spreadsheet. This is where I've calculated the total interest earned within the fund from fiscal years 2013 through fiscal year 20. So fiscal year 20, as a reminder, does end 6/30/20, or it did end rather 6/30/20. And our total interest earned from fiscal year 13 to fiscal year 20 was, roughly $34 million. We had to use 13 million of that to backfill per that update to the cash invested cash methodology. So as you recall, perhaps in our fiscal year 19 allocable interest, when we did the updates to the restoration plan, we had about $16 million worth of interest available to allocate. We ended up allocating, close to 10.5 million of that, and that was to, Butte groundwater, as you can see, for 4.4 million, Anaconda of 900,000, Aquatics 4.7 million, Terrestrial 450,000. So that, reduced the amount of interest we had available. However, there was some residual interest earnings from fiscal year 19, and then all of those for fiscal year 20 that we now have unallocated for a total of $10.3 million. So, that's, as you can see there for Butte, roughly 219,000, about 38,000 from Anaconda, Aquatics 5.2 million, Terrestrial 51,000, The reserves for aquatics, 3 million, and then terrestrial reserve of 1.2 million. So that's the interest piece. And then moving on to the third section of this spreadsheet is where we have our expenses. And so the first column there in this third section, fiscal year 2013 to fiscal year 20 expenses, includes the expenses directly charged to these allocations. So that's, you know, that does not include our overhead costs. So in total, for Butte groundwater, we've got about 26.3 million in expenditures, Anaconda 10.4 million, aquatics 14.3 million, and terrestrial 16.2 million. We have not spent out of the aquatics reserve or the terrestrials reserve. So in total, direct expenses to these allocations, about $67.3 million there. Then moving on to the next column in this section is the fiscal year 13 through fiscal year 20 general expenses, revenue, and liabilities. So this includes, you know, our NRDP internal costs, rent, insurance, you know, IT, all of those sorts of expenses. And then also the liabilities are for costs that hit at fiscal year end, for which we're going to be obligated to pay in the next fiscal year and have to put them in a holding account since they can't directly hit the correct coding. So anyway, in total, those were $1.6 million for fiscal years 13 through 20. Butte groundwater had about 323,000 in those internal expenses. Anaconda groundwater about 193,000. Aquatics 316,000, and terrestrial 786,000. So the third column here is just a reminder of our fiscal year 20 transfers to the parent per plan amendments. As you guys may recall, Butte groundwater, $5.2 million came out of there. And then from the aquatics reserve, 4.8 million, terrestrial reserve, 3.2, that was the SSTOU dollars. So in total, we transferred out 13.2 million for those amendments.
Miranda, you need to move to the next slide, please.
No, and I apologize, Doug, but I'm not done with this slide. I'm still, I just need to recap the final fiscal year 20 end balance, and then we can move to the next slide. But this is, so in total, when we take all of the original allocation, we add the interest and the expenses, we're left with our total cash invested cash balance for the end of fiscal year 20. So that takes us to a total for this portion of the Upper Clark Fork River Restoration Fund of $63.6 million. So for Butte groundwater, that leaves us with about 2.9 million in the cash invested cash balance. For Anaconda, we did close out that allocation. Their restoration plan was complete, and we brought that to the council last year and said that, you know, in fiscal year 20 we'd be closing that out. So I have put that as completed. Aquatics, the end balance is roughly 41 million. Terrestrial, 3.9 million. Aquatics reserve, 11.1 million. And then terrestrial reserve of close to 4.8 million. So like I said, that brings a total to about 63.6 million in cash and invested cash. Next slide, please, Miranda. So moving on here to the other part of the Upper Clark Brook River Basin Restoration Fund, we have encumbered funds as well that we need to just remind everyone of. That includes the grants. We've been talking about that. That is where CFWEP, that million, will be coming out of. We still have some encumbered grant commitments. So they're also, that funding is also contained in that balance for fiscal year 20 end balance. I apologize, this slide shows fiscal year 19 or 2019 end balance. That is a typo. It should say fiscal year 20 end balance for the grants was $6.9 million. And then we also have the Dutchman, $2.4 million was set aside for Dutchman. We've spent, you know, roughly 78,000, leaving about $2.3 million for Dutchman. Milltown, 120,000. We've spent, you know, close to 80,000 of that. About $40,000 remains for that. We will also be getting $2.5 million transferred from DEQ to the Warm Springs ponds. I just put that there as a reminder. We don't have that money yet, so it's not in the green section there. We also The completed carryover for internal costs of $335,000 is from the closeout of Anaconda. This is to set aside funds to pay for NRDP's liabilities and obligations, including, accrued sick leave, and to close out the fund when we get to that point. So in total, this encumbered fund portion of the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Fund is $9.6 million. When we add that with the other restoration categories of the groundwater, the aquatics, terrestrial, and the reserves of 63.6, we get a total Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund cash and invested cash balance as of June 30, 2020. So that's fiscal year 20 end of 63.2 million, or 73, excuse me, $73.2 million. And so that's where things landed at the end of that fiscal year. So we'll move on to the next slide here. And I just wanted to provide this to the council as a reminder of the parrot transfers that occurred in fiscal year 20. So out of the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Fund, which I already showed you guys, the $13.2 million that came out on my first spreadsheet. But anyway, $8 million from the 2016 excess SSTOU allocation, $5.2 million from the Butte groundwater allocation. And then from the Butte Area 1 fund, there was $5.3 million that was transferred to the parrot. And that came from $3 million from stream restoration allocation, and then $2.3 million from the mine waste area restoration and re-veg allocation. So in total, $18.5 million was transferred to the parrot in fiscal year 20. Next slide, please. So as is tradition, I also provide the council with our other NRDP funds that are related to the Clark Fork. So just high level, Butte Area 1, Sabres Fund balance started at about $12.7 million, ended about $7.5 million. The large expenditures there are related to parrot transfers. The ending cash invested cash balance of Butte Area 1 Fund is about $6.4 million. So then moving on to the Clark Fork River Fund, starting Sabres balance was $30.6 million. Our revenue expenses were real close, so not a big change to that fund from fiscal year 20 activity. And so ended that with about $30.8 million, and our cash invested cash balance is $26.8 million in the Clark Fork River Fund. And then we've got the Smelter Hill Fund. Started out with about $9.8 million. Once again, revenue and expenses are pretty close there, so not a huge change to this fund. Ended with a Sabres Fund balance of $9.9 million, cash invested cash balance of $9 million there. And finally, the Parrot Fund. So we started out with about $10.9 million in the Parrot Fund. As you can see, revenue, $18.8 million. Well, 18.5 of that is from the transfers. So that's comprised of revenue. Expenditures of about $6.9 million. And so that leaves us with a balance of about 2.8. When we adjust for cash and invested cash available, it's about $21.7 million there for the Parrot Fund. So that concludes my financial presentation. I will ask if there's any questions and turn it over to Bill for the coordination of those questions.
Any questions, council or public member? Let's start with the council. Any questions from the council?
Mary Price has a question.
Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, this is Mary Price. Shannon, on your fund overview slide, I had a question.
Certainly. Miranda will navigate there for us, Mary.
So under grants, the end balance for 2020, that's $6.9 million. The $1 million that we just approved for the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program, would that come out of that $6.9 million?
Yes, you are correct, Mary. And just so everyone's aware, we have several other, open contracts, including like the Butte Silver Greenway, which, is contract and is obligated. And so in my reconciliation, Mary, I did account for all of the obligated contracted work we still have. And there were remaining funds that would allow for $1 million to be transferred to the education fund for the.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the council on the, looks like Maureen has a question.
Yeah, just, I'm wondering what the forecast is for the Parrot financial forecast.
So I can provide that, Shannon. If you can actually go to the last slide, Miranda, where it shows the fund. One more. So right now, the Parrot project, the dollars that were transferred to the Parrot fund were for the most part for phases 2 of the Parrot fund, and phase 2 included the relocation of the Butte-Silverboe County shops and the removal of the tailings south of Civic Center Road, or behind the Civic Center. All estimates show that the Butte-Silverboe shops are coming in on budget, so we do not see an issue there. And we will know in short time, early December, what the actual bid on the Parrot project will be. So we will know whether or not any money will be potentially be able to be coming back from the Parrot fund to the Upper Clark Fork and the BAO restoration funds. So that being said, if there are dollars left over, those would be reimbursed to both the Upper Clark Fork and the Butte Area 1 Restoration Fund. And also to update people that something during the 2019 amendment that we were not able to discuss at that time because of the CD, or the consent decree negotiations, is the $20.5 million associated with that settlement, or that consent decree that is coming to the state for the state to implement the Blacktail Creek remediation. And once that remediation is done, the leftovers from that will be reimbursed to the Upper Clark Fork Restoration Fund and the BAO Restoration Fund at the percentages they went in at. So the Upper Clark Fork will be reimbursed approximately 50% or 53% of whatever leftover there is from that settlement dollars. We do believe that there will be leftovers from those settlement dollars. So those dollars, probably it'll take more than 5 years in order for that to be completed, but those funds should be coming back to the Upper Clark Fork. I know I went on beyond your question, Maureen, but I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
Are there any more questions from council about the financials? You have another question, Maureen?
I do. And we still have 2.4 million for the Dutchman. Is that right? That we're keeping in the fund. Is that right?
No, that is that. So we list those as Dutchman funds, but those are actually those are wetland funds, wetland and riparian funds. So we were required by the consent decree to allocate those. And I believe I previously informed the AC on that, but maybe we haven't.
No, I think you have. I was just kind of trying to remember, and when I saw it written there, I was like, what?
Yeah, so we left them identified as the Dutchman Fund, but those funds have been allocated in the state's wetland and riparian plan to preserve, enhance, and protect wetlands in the Upper Clark Fork. And the two areas that we identified were wetland and riparian areas within the Spotted Dog Wildlife Management Area and at Milltown. So that plan is flexible. We do believe that the dollars that were allocated to protection of wetlands and enhancement at Milltown, there will be extra funds there, and that we will be looking at reallocating those funds to other areas in the Upper Basin. So.
Thank you.
Yep. Are there any other questions of council on the financials? Are there any public questions of Shannon or myself on the financial report? Are there any, so I'll reiterate, are there any other questions on the financials? If seeing none, we will move to the update of the aquatic and terrestrial plans. So Bill, at this time, I'd like to move to that portion of the agenda, and Alicia Stickney, Brian Barkowiak, and Greg Mullen will be providing the council and the public updates of the aquatic and terrestrial plan implementation starting this year. We are going to, because we're running behind time now, and also that this is virtual, we are going to give a brief summary here and focus people to looking at the handout, where we actually give a lot more detail in writing about what the staff has completed working with our partners within the Upper Basin. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Alicia.
Thank you, Doug.
Or I guess I'm turning over to Brian. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Doug. This is Brian Barkowiak with the Natural Resource Damage Program. Again, we're going to give you a very quick overview. As Doug said, if you have questions or need more information, there is much more in your packets, and we are always available if you want to talk or discuss anything else. Before I get started, I'd like to, again, thank Maureen and Jackie for coming out and planting trees at Racetrack Ponds a few weeks ago. It was greatly appreciated. And then next slide, Miranda. So just to give you an update on some of the projects we have been working on that relate to flow in the Upper Clark Fork. As I like to say, we are still looking at any way, shape, or form to get more water into the river, particularly the reach between Racetrack and Deer Lodge. Unfortunately, we weren't able to negotiate a release for Silver Lake for 2020, but we are continuing discussions for future releases. We have been working with ADLC. They have a municipal water right at Hearst Lake outside Anaconda. They have an interest in protecting that water right, and we have an interest in having in-stream flow, so that makes a good partnership. There were two unnamed, unallocated, or there was two unnamed springs with no water rights associated with them. We're evaluating those for potential flow and habitat work. A project that we're pretty excited about, we've been working with the University of Montana and the Clark Fork Coalition to evaluate a feasibility for a short-term water leasing program in the Upper Clark Fork. Again, we do have water rights associated with the purchase of the Clark Fork River Ranch, and we are assessing the in-stream flow potential of those. We've started working with and hope to continue working with BP and ARCO and EPA to evaluate operations of Warm Springs ponds and the broader water management in the Upper Clark Fork to increase flow and decrease temperature. We're always on the lookout for potential property or water rights for sale that could provide flow to the Upper Clark Fork. And of course, we are continuing our work monitoring and understanding the timing and magnitude of dewatering, as well as to meet our requirements for projects. Next slide, Miranda. Just a follow-up on 2 of the flow projects that the council approved last year. The Helen Johnson project, the completion notice was submitted in March. As of next year, there's going to be just over 9 CFS of in-stream flow in the Upper Clark Fork. We are working with Lampert Ranch, who's the last water user on the Helen Johnson ditch, for a project to replace their current ditch with a pipe system. And thanks to DEQ, we'll be coordinating this work with their phase 3 cleanup. Our project partners Clark Fork Coalition has had to submit numerous severance and abandonment forms associated with the dry Cottonwood Creek Ranch for the potential sale. And for 2021 plans, we have some in-stream flow change applications. We're planning on submitting one for dry Cottonwood Creek, one for the former Deer Lodge River Ranch, and one for the former or the Racetrack Pond property. And next slide. Again, as a follow-up, council approved the Harvey Creek Flow Project last year. Just in September, DNRC issued their final change orders, and Harvey Creek is moving forward with infrastructural improvements. Again, this is going to eliminate 6 diversions that prevented passage and had entrainment. And I think my last slide, Miranda. We have been working with the stored water users at Racetrack Lake to complete the required dam inspection, update the operation maintenance plan and emergency action plan. And thanks to the hard work of the Clark Fork Coalition, there's a potential settlement agreement with most of the Racetrack water users. And fingers crossed, after almost 10 years, we're hoping for a flow release in 2021 from Racetrack Lake. And that concludes my presentation. Feel free to open it up for questions.
Are there any questions of Brian on any of the flow projects? Or if you want, we can wait to the end of the presentations. All right, seeing none, why don't we move to the non-flow projects and Alicia Stickney's update.
Okay, I'm Alicia Stickney. I'm one of the project managers at NRDP. So could you go to the next slide, please, Miranda? I have a double header. So the NRDP has targeted 17 watersheds for work in its recent update to the plans. And development and implementation of projects on the non-flow aquatic projects in priority watersheds includes protecting and enhancing riparian habitat, improving fish passage, reducing fish entrainment, and improving in-stream habitat. These projects are being accomplished via contracts and task orders between NRDP and property owners, our project sponsors and partners, Clark Fork Coalition, Trout Unlimited, and the Watershed Restoration Coalition, and various engineering firms. These projects require continued landowner contacts, evaluation of current riparian and in-stream habitat conditions, evaluation of passage and entrainment issues, prioritization of restoration actions, developing restoration project designs, and implementation of restoration projects. So in general, this year, this is an update for 2020. We've been working on 5 different construction projects for entrainment. You'll see that there is overlap with some of the fish passage projects because they are the same. Often if you're fixing one, then you're fixing, if you're fixing entrainment, you're also fixing passage. So we have Cottonwood and Baggs Creeks and Macquarie Ranch infrastructure that was completed in the very end of 2019. So I'm including it in this update. There was Mill Creek irrigation infrastructure, Browns Gulch, the Brothers Ranch diversion, Rock Creek, Borenson Marletto diversion and ditch, and Flint Creek. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Allendale diversion because it was and the private diversions there. It's a $3 million project. So next slide, Miranda, please. These are a lot of these are under construction right now as we speak, or they've just been finishing up in late October and November. So it's really new news here. So this is the Allendale diversion that we have been working on for and the private diversions. The work is going to be taking place this winter 2020 and then into spring of 2021. It was prioritized, the Allendale diversion was prioritized in the 2012 restoration plan, and it was Fish, Wildlife and Parks' #1 priority in Flint Creek. There was up to 50% of the fish were being entrained in a large canal at Allendale. So we've been working with DNRC since 2015. Did evaluation and design. We amended that to include construction. And we also then incorporated the private user diversion downstream and private user diversion and screen based on its proximity to Allendale. So it's all being taken care of at the same time. The private user diversions are both fish passage and entrainment projects, 2 diversions and 4 screens total. So as I said, it was about a $3 million project. It was all funded by NRDP and it's under construction right now. So these are active, recent photos that were put together or that Bo sent me for what's going on out there right now. Next slide. So we also had construction projects for fish passage. There are 5 of those. So the Flint private diversions that we just talked about, Browns Gulch, the Brothers diversion, Mill diversion was another one that was overlapped with entrainment, Cottonwood Bags Creek and Macquarie, the Macquarie Ranch diversion, and then O'Neill Creek, we had a bridge replacement that was a washed out culvert, just finished. Next one, Miranda. So we have construction projects. We also have projects that are in design for entrainment. We're working at Blacktail Creek, at Browns Gulch, Cottonwood Creek, and O'Neill Creek. These are all in various stages of design, from conceptual to final phases, depending on how far along it's progressed. And we're aiming to construct all of these in 2021. Next one. So projects in design for fish passage, Blacktail Creek, Warm Springs Creek, and basin reservoir infrastructure. And once again, they're in various stages of design, from conceptual to final, and we're hoping to do that work in 2021. Next, Miranda. We also have some riparian restoration projects. There's also often a component of that with other projects, but these are strictly for sort of riparian restoration. So Blacktail Creek and Little Blackfoot at the DW Beck Ranch. There was an avulsion there so working with the ranch to address that. And next one, Miranda. 4 projects where we are we're still trying to figure out what's going on, are still, so far moving, we're, discussions with the landowners. So the Clark Fork River Dutchman nitrogen study on the main stem of the Clark Fork. It's the only one that we have that's not on a tributary. Racetrack Creek in early stages, Basin Creek reroute in early stages, and Gold Creek as well. Next, Miranda. So as part of what we're doing on the tributaries, annually Fish, Wildlife and Parks monitors all the priority streams in the basin, and that informs our designs and our what we do in the creeks. Particularly, there were some big studies that were done in Browns Gulch and Boulder Creek. These are projects that were done before, so they're undergoing monitoring at this point. That's it.
So I guess, does anybody have any specific questions for Alicia on her update? Okay, if seeing none, we will move to Greg and the terrestrial and recreation updates.
Okay. Hi, hello, everybody. Thanks, Doug. Hope everybody's doing fine. When we used to meet in person, this is about the time when if I used to get up there quite a few times, right at the end, when there's very few minutes left, and Bill used to say, "Okay, Greg, let's go. We got to get out of here." So, but we don't have to drive anywhere. So I will take my time. I have about a half dozen slides. Anyways, so for land acquisitions, the big one we got done this year was the Stumptown addition to the Garrity Mountain Wildlife Management Area. That just closed a few weeks ago, and it's only a mile and a half from Anaconda. We had a tour of that with the advisory council back in, I believe it was April. I have a slide of that coming up. We're working on selling the Cottonwood Creek Ranch. It's been in the market for a couple of years now. We do have a few potential offers, and of course, if we do sell that ranch, the conservation easement, will be in place, and that easement meets the goals of the restoration plan, in perpetuity. We also have a fishing access site we're working with Fish Island Parks on. It's a very long one. It's about 6 miles from Garrison to Phosphate, a strip of land that happens to be for sale. It's about 410 acres, and we already have some match for that. So we'll see how that goes. That should be happening in the next few months. Next slide, please, Miranda. So yeah, next slide, please, Miranda. And so here's I did mention that we visited the, whoops, back one, please. Thank you, Miranda. So here's a picture of that Stumptown 600-acre addition to Garrity Mountain Wildlife Management Area, a mile and a half from Anaconda. We had the tour back in April. This part of the property is right on Warm Springs Creek. Almost a mile of the creek is part of that land purchase. So a very nice addition, very close to Anaconda. Next slide, please. Quickly on habitat enhancement work, we work on different ranches for enhancing wildlife habitat. We've done designs for off-stream watering, for livestock and riparian protection on about 4 ranches. We're doing scoping for conifer encroachment removals on about 200 acres. We completed some projects this year on several ranches for riparian fencing, bioweed control, riparian protection. Next slide, please. And here's a picture of some of the habitat enhancement work, rock stream crossing on the Spring Creek. And next slide, please. Now I'm going to switch to the recreation projects. If you remember the old Yellowstone Trail, that was finished at the very end of 2019 from Garrison to Grand Coors Ranch. This year, we're working on the design and for the last 4 miles all the way to Deer Lodge, and that will take place starting next year. Well, we finish next year as well. We have a Drummond Kiwanis Park construction and trail of the park features that will be completed this year. That's about a $30,000 project that just kind of really came on the radar in the past couple months. And Milltown State Park, they had record visitation this year. Things are going very well down there. About 100,000 people in 2020. So that's been a real successful recreation project. And with that, Bill, that is my last slide. And so if there's any questions.
So are there any questions from the council of any of the people who presented here recently about the activities that have taken place in 2020? No council questions. Any questions or comments? I see Casey Hackathorn from the public has raised his hand. Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, I was just curious if the changes afoot in Helena, if the next administration takes a hard line on acquisitions of state lands, is that going to affect your ability to continue implementing some of those terrestrial priorities?
Greg, I'll take a shot at that. At this time, Casey, at this point in time, Casey, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We will continue to implement the restoration plans as written and approved. We do, as with all new administrations, we have orientation with the new trustee and update them on where we are, what we do, and how we do it. And so I guess that's to be seen whether we're told to look at other things besides acquisitions. But that's yet to be seen. We just don't know at this point in time. Are there any other questions of the staff or about the updates? Go ahead, Mary, or Maureen, go ahead.
Mary first.
Thank you, Maureen. I just wanted to make a comment, sitting here listening to the update on all the projects. It's really gratifying to see the progress that has been made. As a permanent member of, the tribes are a permanent member, and I've served for, 10 years now. It's really, it's just great to see all this work coming together and the progress that we're making as a team. And I really appreciate all that the Natural Resources Damages Program staff does. You're really a great crew, and I just wanted to acknowledge all your hard work and also the DEQ crew as well. It's really exciting to see this all coming together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We appreciate that. In speaking for the NRDP, I think I speak for all the staff and everybody in the program, is that it is a coordinated effort, not just with us, but with all of our partners, Trout Unlimited, Clark Fork Coalition, Watershed Restoration Coalition, the landowners, everybody that we work with in the basin. It is a coordinated and definitely a we project, because it takes everybody to pull this off, as well as the council. I mean, the council's been associated with this for a very long time and been very supportive of our activities, which is necessary. So I see Maureen has her hand up.
Yep. Hi, this is a question, and it might go back to our first presentation, really, but I think it relates to this last stuff too. Is so the NRDP did some sampling this summer to try and get in new areas. I think you said it was in Reach A, but I might be mistaken. But the downstream areas of Deer Lodge, to try and quantify what was going to be coming up there in terms of remedy and restoration. Is that right, Doug?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So when might we expect that information to have been analyzed and be presentable?
Well, the contractors just got out of the field here within the last month. The data is being analyzed right now, and it is our hope that we have it in our hands sometime this winter, and the state can start looking at that. And once we have an understanding of what it is, we can present that to the public and to the council if desired.
Okay, thank you. Second question on that is same question with the nitrogen. possibly coming from relatively far upstream?
Yeah, this study actually was spurred by a comment that Pat Saffel made when he came from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. He came and presented to the advisory council back prior to 2012, and wondering why the fisheries population was decreased or so low between Rock Creek or Flint Creek and Rock Creek. And after Pat's presentation, I remember council members saying, wow, that's really interesting. Why don't we allocate some funding to that? So this is one of the, the best things that we have from our plans perspective and development is the outreach and the input that the council has. And so this was a direct input from the council to allocate funding to this. We have contracted with the University of Montana, as well as some of our consultants, to actually look at where the nitrogen is coming from. And the university, actually Vicki Watson has looked at this for many years, but Maury Villette with the university picked this up and continued this and identified that nitrogen is the limiting factor and the main reason we have such a cladophora bloom or algae bloom in the Clark Fork, especially in that lower reach. And he actually traced it using fingerprinting back to the Dutchman area, or the area between Lost Creek and Racetrack Creek, which is the Dutchman wetland area. Right now, they are in the process of identifying exactly where that source of nitrogen is coming from. There are a couple potentials. There's a wastewater treatment facility up there, but they are meeting their standards, and a lot of that water gets actually pumped up to irrigate some fields. The other source of potential nitrogen is actually, there's a large wetland fen there, and a wetland fen is a very old wetland complex. And when wetland fens actually start to die or dry out, the chemical reaction within that fen, actually they become, instead of a nitrogen sink, they can become a nitrogen source. So we're in the process of looking at and identifying the exact source of the nitrogen coming from that area. We're also have also tasked the university and our contractors to look at, not only what is the source, but what can we do about it? Is there something that we can do to invest some restoration funds in to help remedy or decrease the amount of nitrogen coming out of that area?
Thanks, Doug. That's really interesting. And I remember back then we were talking about not knowing why the dissolved oxygen level was so low there. So it's neat to hear that something's important being done on this.
Yeah, it is. You were starting to break up there, Maureen. So.
Sorry. No, I know we were talking about dissolved oxygen. I think Mr. Saffel called it the DO SAG there. And it's nice to hear more work is being done on it and some interesting things are being discovered. So thank you.
Yep. Are there any other questions? So with that, actually, the Clark Fork Coalition has put together a very nice video of some restoration work that we did up on Boulder Creek in collaboration with the coalition and the landowners up there. And we'd like to play that at this point. We think it's a very nice video and kind of a nice ending to the meeting here.
I'm gonna try that again. Let me know if the sound's not working still.
Boulder Creek Watershed is a really special place. It's a tributary to Flint Creek that comes from high country in the Flint Creek Range with cold, clean water, and it is a real stronghold for native fish, especially cutthroat trout and bull trout. One of the 4 places in the whole upper Clark Fork above the Blackfoot that even has bull trout still surviving. And that's one of the reasons the fish biologists told us when we first started working in the Flint Creek drainage that Boulder Creek is a key priority, and that's why we went there, and that's where we found excellent projects with good landowners where we could work with people who really care about this drainage.
My name is Jeremy Mickey. I'm a project manager and field superintendent for a local construction company out of Granite County. My family homesteaded in the town called Princeton, which is about 2 miles upstream from here on Boulder Creek. So I have a vested interest on Boulder Creek from both a historical perspective with my family and as well as a current perspective. And I'm a really avid fisherman who tries to do as much as I can to see the effects of some of these projects and some of the things that have been done on Boulder Creek in the past with just kind of not really scientific methods, but with the fly rod.
Boulder Creek flowed down its old channel, 2011 massive flooding event up here on Boulder Creek. It took off across the meadow that I'm looking down, intercepted a pond, blew out a dam, and created an upstream fisheries migration barrier, but also a place where large trout could then hang out in a pond that would then be picked off by birds. So there were a lot of impacts to the local fishery that needed to be addressed. And so through that project identification process, NRDP, working with our other partners, got an engineering firm on board and awarded to a local construction company here in Granite County. There's about $20 million allocated to the tributaries for direct fisheries restoration work like we've done here on Boulder Creek. And so we had these priority projects in Boulder Creek that all tie to getting fish out and down to Flint Creek and ultimately the Clark Fork River, and then allowing those fish that out migrate to Boulder Creek, Flint Creek, and then ultimately the upper Clark Fork River Basin.
Watershed Restoration Coalition, Clark Fork Coalition with the NRDP had great partnerships, but the key in Boulder Creek Watershed, the key to success are the landowners. The landowners that we worked with there, really dedicated to conservation, really in love with the land that they manage in that drainage, and that makes all the difference.
Many years we had concerns because during flooding season it was taking out good dirt and pasture with the high water and making new stream through some of the areas which would take away from the pasture. Then we met Will and the groups he is working with currently, and he told us their ideas and what they were trying to accomplish, and we felt like they were very viable and wonderful project. We didn't have any second thoughts either. One of the things that I found super interesting was the way the willows were planted. Well, the very next year they started sprouting, and it was just amazing to me to see it, and then to have the trees and the willows that were planted around the edges start growing rather quickly. We were pleased to see that happen as well.
I'm Ole Olson. I am a 5th generation native Montana. We had a flood in 2011, a pretty serious flood. It actually washed out above, right on the edge of our property, and came right through this valley bottom here and washed out everything. The trees, the fences, until it actually plugged the whole creek and sent it over here. So they had to dig out a ton of rock to put that channel back into its original position. And when I first saw what they did with the creek, I was just shocked. It looked so good. That, and obviously it's gonna grow fish. You know, the whole idea was to help the Clark Fork restore the fishery. Well, I think this did.
So Bill, that ends the presentation that the program has. I don't know if you have any other thing to add. I guess Maureen has a question.
First of all, are there any public comments for the good of the order before we adjourn? I can't tell.
Yeah, there's Maureen has her hand up, but and I'm not sure if Maureen's going to adjourn the meeting or not, but I was asked to let the council know on behalf of the current administration and the governor who will be leaving office here. He does appreciate your efforts over the years and appreciates all that you have done for the resources, the natural resources within the upper Clark Fork River Basin, and we were asked to pass that on to you guys as he is leaving office. So.
Thanks, Doug.
Yep.
Any other public comment? I have just a brief comment, but anybody else have public comment?
Maureen has her hand up, Bill.
Bill, you can go first. It might be the same thing.
Well, I just want to say it's been, we've had another great year. We've had some tremendous success, and I just want to thank everybody again for working so hard together and collaborating and really trying to keep a culture of collaboration so we can get things done. I think that that's been one of our great achievements. Again, another great year, and thank you, everybody. Maureen?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks. Those were great comments. That wasn't what I was going to say. So Doug, I have a process question, and I think some of us know the answers to this and a few of us might not. So I wanted to get it out there, but this is what I think that our current executive order for the advisory council runs for a little while yet, but that the new administration can change that whenever they get into office, if they choose to.
Yes, Maureen, I'm going to let Bill, did you want to take that? So Maureen, yes, it is an executive order that appoints people to the advisory council, and you are correct, though, that your executive order does carry through to September 2021. And I do believe that, you know, and until such time that you are not a part, that you will continue to act in your current role.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn? Do you have a motion to adjourn?
Sure, I'll make that motion.
Do you want a second, Maureen?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll second it, yeah.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any nays?
Aye.
Okay, thank you all.
Yes, thank you
Great
very
job.
much.
And thank you. And again, thanks to the great work of everybody on the NRD. And thank you, Maureen, for the hand clap. And I apologize to Greg specifically for keeping the fire under him.
It's been great. It's been great working with all you guys, and thank you. And obviously a labor of love from our end, and you guys have made it really interesting, and we enjoyed working with you. And I'm just echoing what Doug said.